Certainly, Dave.
We can hear you. Thanks very much. Hi, Hillary. Can we do a mic check, please? Hello, Hillary. Can we do a mic check, please?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Hello, Mayor Scharf. May we do a mic check, please?
Testing 1, 2, 3.
We can hear you. Thank you, sir. Hi, Consuelo. Can we do a mic check, please?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just a courtesy announcement that we are now live on the internet.
Hello, Councilmember Niss. Can we do a mic check, please? You're muted.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. We can hear you. Thanks very much.
Great.
Hi, Tony. Can we do a mic check, please?
It's Tony, 123-321.
We can hear you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Can you still hear me? I changed to a headset from my computer speaker.
Yes, we can, sir.
Great, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Wow, I like your virtual background, Cindy.
I like your you actually have a virtual background. That's pretty awesome. Do you have a color version of that too?
I do, yes. Could
Yeah,
switch to that.
It's kind of an amazing, it's an amazing piece of art. I don't know how it is as a building, like getting from one point to another, but it's a beautiful art.
Have you been inside?
I haven't. Is it amazing?
So, well, the people I know that work there don't like it. They say it takes so long to get from one office to another because It doesn't connect on the upper floors. You have to go downstairs to the bottom floor, walk around, make sure you're at the right set of elevators, go back up to find whoever
go-
you're looking
Go
for.
whatever direction.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah, because it was taking too much space in hallways to have every level go all the way through. So they have a lot of locked doors on all the other levels.
And do you know what the square footage of the interior is?
I should, but I don't remember.
Yeah, it just seems massive. I mean, really massive. Councilmember Bracco, I was appreciating your clock a couple meetings ago.
Oh, thank you.
That's showing the colors, so to speak.
Oh, I have a lot of stuff.
I think that is the first professional game I ever attended. Well, maybe it was A's and then the Raiders.
My uncle took me when I was about 10 years old, and I was hooked.
Yeah, we just did an announcement that the 49ers are letting their stadium be used as a vote center for October 31st. It's going to be great because it's so huge that, you won't have to worry about social distancing or anything else. And I know a number of stadiums are doing that across the country, which is pretty cool.
I thought you were going to say people could camp there.
Can't vote. Nope. Vote.
It's 2.8 million square feet.
Wow. Okay, now I understand the tension about walking for about a year to get to your other meeting. Wow. In one building.
People will go outside and get on the bicycles and then ride to another part of the building to go back up.
Yeah, although I guess that's a way to get your steps in.
Yeah, I got yelled at. Rod Deardon Jr. said, let's ride the bicycles. And then the security people started yelling at me saying, visitors can't ride the bikes. I said, oh, all right.
You're like, hey, I'm no visitor. I'm the mayor. Did you try that?
That's not going to get you very far.
No, I can confirm that it won't get you very far with Apple. I would say their relations with the city are slim to none, except when they really want something, to be honest.
Well, we're going to go ahead and we have about a minute to get started. I'm just going to remind folks, if they can take themselves off mute, then we can do the roll call. And then I'll review the agenda with everyone, and then we'll get to work. That sound all right with everybody? That's the way that.
Yes.
All right. All right. So I'm going to call our meeting formally to order. And this is the Unhoused Task Force meeting for September the 30th. I'm going to ask the clerk if the clerk can call roll.
Member Jordan.
Present.
Member Haraz.
Present.
Council Member Bybee. Council
Here.
Member. Thank you. Mayor Stephen Scharf.
Present.
Council Member Bracco.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Martinez Beltran. Council Member Sinks. Council Member Sinks. Absent.
Oh, yes, I'm here.
Oh, thank you. Present. Council Member Dominguez.
Present.
Vice Mayor Nunez.
Present.
Mayor Lawler.
Present.
Mayor Constantine.
Present.
Council Member Ramirez.
Here.
Council Member Peralez. Council Member Peralez. Councilmember Esparza,
Here.
Councilmember O'Neill, Councilmember O'Neill, absent. Vice Mayor Smith,
Here.
Mayor Klein,
Here.
Member Clark,
Here.
Member Reeve,
Here.
Member Itari,
Here.
Member Baines,
Here.
Member Franklin,
Here.
Member Sharp, Member Sharp, absent. Member Stepanoff,
Here.
Member Cooper, Member Cooper, Member Pham, Member Pham, absent. Member King, Member King, Member Shaw,
Here.
Vice Chairperson Ellenberg,
I'm here.
and Chairperson Chavez.
Sure.
Thank you. You have a quorum.
Thank you very much. And what I wanted to just remind folks is that the link that was sent to you to check into the meeting and to get your materials, when you leave, if you leave before the meeting, if you could send a note to the clerk, just letting them know what time you're leaving would be helpful for them as they keep minutes. And if you notice that any colleague joins us, if you could just put a note in the chat so that the clerks know that, and that way we can count the person as being present. I would appreciate that, and I will remind myself to do that. I think we have somebody who just joined us.
There isn't a chat on my,
You know what? I forgot.
Yes.
There isn't a chat. So here's what I'm gonna ask. If you could even shoot an email if you notice anybody else joining us. And did anybody not get called for the roll?
Teresa O'Neill from Santa Clara. I'm sorry, I was having a little difficulty.
No problem. Welcome, Teresa. Anybody else
Thank you.
not get called for roll?
Chair Cindy, it's Liz Ness. I'm here.
Yes, and Liz, we're gonna actually officially put you on the committee next Tuesday. So we're glad you're here.
Good. In
All
the
right.
meantime, I'm auditing.
Yes, that's right. We're being audited. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go to the back just to our meeting and to our process today. And what I wanted to just do is we're going to walk through a couple of options. Agenda items. I always say options. And the purpose of today's meeting, one of the big areas that we're going to dive into is funding, to better understand what money we're using and how we're doing that funding. And then we're going to talk a little bit about options for the board to consider as recommendations. And then we're going to discuss a pilot program. So with that, and then at the end, what I'm going to do is, because we have folks who are going to want to make public comment, what I'm going to do is allow the staff to do a presentation on item 2A. We'll take 2A and 2B, and then before we talk about the pilot program, we'll take public comment on item 2, and then we'll finish up with item 2C, and then we'll move to public comment altogether. With that, I'm going to start off by just introducing a specific, let me ask, is the staff prepared with one slide to start? So we're going to start with the history slide, I think.
Sorry, Chairperson Chavez.
Yes, we have that.
Yes.
Oh, great, thanks. I didn't mean to catch everybody off their guard. Then the staff is going to review a glossary with examples, so we're talking about the same thing. And then we're going to and then staff is going to talk about funding. So let me just, for a moment, I'm going to just make some kind of broad comments about the investments we're making as we speak, and then Consuelo is going to walk us through a little more detail. So we're spending over $85 million per year to address homelessness. But this is a relatively recent development. And so I really wanted to have Consuelo just give you sort of a broad background, and then we'll kind of take it from there. One other thing I just would say to my colleagues, if I see that the staff sees that you may be off mute and impacting the sound quality, we will ask you to mute yourselves, or we will mute you, but it won't permanently mute you. You'll be able to unmute when you're ready to speak. All right. So Consuelo, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Chairperson Chavez. Consuelo Hernandez, Acting Director for the Office of Supportive Housing. I'm joined this evening by Catherine Kaminsky, who's our Acting Deputy Director, and Hillary Baroga. So we're going to conquer this task together. As Chairperson Chavez mentioned, we wanted to start by giving you all an overview of where the homelessness supportive housing system and management of homelessness, the evolution of that, and why we are where we are today. And if for those of you that had the opportunity to look at our previous community plans to end homelessness, this might sound a little repetitive, but we thought for those of you that are new and wanting to understand the history, that this would be a great overview. So the slide shows, 4 kind of critical points that in our system to highlight. And over the last 15 years or so, the county has gradually organized around a community-wide effort to address homelessness. Specifically in 2003, the city of San Jose completed a homeless strategy designated to eliminate chronic homelessness by focus on prevention, rapid rehousing, and Hillary will go through some of the terminology, but she won't touch on the permanent housing solutions. So for those of you that are new to this, rapid rehousing is basically short-term tenant-based rental assistance for families who don't have as high acuity of need as our chronically homeless population, but there is some debilitating condition or the family finds themselves needing to get some assistance to end their homelessness. So again, the city wanted to focus on preventing people from becoming homeless, rapid rehousing, and then providing wraparound services in a proactive effort and way, which led to the 2005 10-year plan to end homelessness and the 2008 Blue Ribbon Commission, which ultimately culminated in the establishment of Destination Home. And Destination Home is a public-private partnership that allows us to implement the strategies that resulted in the 2011 campaign geared towards ending homelessness. And one of our biggest partners in the system, because they are a public-private entity, they are allowed to move certain dials that we as government agencies aren't allowed to. They can leverage other resources in a way that they are not as restricted as us on the government side. And over the last 2 years, or actually over the last 5 years or so, our coordinated effort has proven that a housing first model works. So if you look at the slide, it talks about from the 1980s to 2004, the majority of the strategy was basically managing homelessness through the leadership of our community-based organizations, providing shelter, some light outreach team to offer basic needs like shelter, shower, food. But it really wasn't until 2011 where we started to focus our programs on housing first. And the intent there is that by focusing on moving people into housing immediately, that is the trigger to get folks to a place where they are healthier, that housing is part of what will get them to recover quicker. And we've been implementing that, testing it specifically around the Housing 1000 campaign. And that led to a lot of coordination between the county, the city of San Jose, the housing authority, and it set the benchmark or the frame or the foundation for a solid partnership over the last over the last 7 years or so. And the focus then became building supportive housing throughout the community. And supportive housing is both, for us, rapid rehousing, so short-term subsidies, building extremely low-income housing, and then building permanent supportive housing, which includes housing units that are extremely low income. They are supported by a project-based voucher to make them, the households have at a minimum a $50 payment in rent a month, and then also wraparound services to make sure that the households that are housed have the services that they need, mental health and other basic services. And a lot of our work has accelerated because of the commitment of our county to, and the voters of this county to approve the 2016 Measure A Affordable Housing Bond. Thus far, and this is the $950 million bond, the Office of Supportive Housing has taken a lead role in implementing the rollout of the programming, working with all of your cities to identify parcels that are prime for housing development, and a requirement to include some of those units for supportive housing. At the same time, the Community Plan to End Homelessness set some very, very high targets to provide housing opportunities to at least 6,000 individuals. We by far exceeded that. And again, our focus has primarily been sustaining and growing the shelter capacities, and at the same time working on producing ELI units that have not kept up to speed with the growth of our community. And through the assistance of Measure A, have been able to make substantial amount of progress. To date, we have funded 27 different developments across the county in 7 different cities. And what we're finding now through the development of our new community plan to end homelessness, it's a 5-year plan. We'll be, as we've mentioned before, going out to each of your cities to present and request endorsement. But because of various financial impacts and growths in our community and a lack of the development of affordable housing, more people are falling into homelessness, which has created a growing need in both shelter, emergency shelter, and we're seeing more folks out on the street. And the charge of this committee then is to think about emergency solutions that we together can create based on a menu of options that Hillary's going to walk you through. Each solution includes the amount of resources that it takes to put that together, some discussion about policy, land use, timing, and then Catherine is going to wrap it up with a general discussion of the state's funding that has been allocated to the county, the COC, and the city of San Jose, and how we've deployed those resources across the county. And then she'll wrap it up with just a general discussion about what resources you all use that may be available as you start to identify options or programs for emergency shelter. So with that, I will hand it over to Hillary.
Thank you, Consuelo. So we'll start by reviewing a couple of the things that we've seen in prior meetings. So one is just a reminder about the proposed outcome for this task force, and that is that you all are recommending a package of emergency solutions guided by the third strategy in the community plan to end homelessness, which is improving the quality of life for unsheltered individuals and creating healthy neighborhoods for all. And then at your last meeting, we looked at the various responses from various cities around sheltering and what folks are doing around sheltering, which cities are implementing safe parking, which cities have drop-in resources that are funding with local community service agencies. Several cities have outreach services, and many cities are providing basic needs assistance in some way. And so there's a lot of work happening and implemented by each of the jurisdictions to date. So now we'll take a look at the different types of emergency solutions, as Consuelo mentioned. But before we jump into each type, in the work that we've been looking at together, the framework, we talked a lot about how the different structures could be designed and the different types of structures for this temporary housing these temporary housing interventions. And when we implement programs and think about how people are going to use those facilities, we think about them in two different ways. We think about emergency shelter or interim housing. And emergency shelter is designed to provide some immediate relief for someone's housing crisis today. It's temporary residence for people who are unhoused. Most of the shelters have time limits on their stays. Some of those time limits are driven by different regulations or funding sources. And the way that people access emergency shelter can vary. Some shelters receive and fill beds by first come, first serve or lottery-based walk-ins. Other shelters maintain waiting lists to access the shelters. And most of the shelters receive referrals from either service providers or the county, in particular now through the county's shelter hotline. And then also temporary housing that could be used in any one of the types of structures that we've described in the framework matrix. And these are if you look at the spreadsheet from a few meetings back, these are the items in the blue section. The interim is interim housing. And interim housing is a temporary residence for people who are unhoused but have an enrollment in a supportive housing program and may have a housing subsidy available to them. This includes rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing that Consuelo described. And the people who need these types of housing programs, this interim housing, are folks who have either housing search in progress, they have a voucher and they're just looking for the right unit for them, or they're waiting for their unit to be built and developed. So it could be a matter of they need a few weeks of a place to stay until construction's finished. And so as we think about the types of structures that can be put up and the different categories of program design for the people who are going to stay in those facilities, these are some of the ways that we in the Office of Supportive Housing think of those programs. The outcomes that you looked at before, where 24% of people exiting emergency shelter are exiting to a permanent housing situation, mostly fall in emergency shelter. It's our hope that people who are exiting interim housing are exiting to a permanent housing solution in much higher percentages. But interim housing is a relatively new program model here in Santa Clara County. And so we don't have the data yet distinguished between those two program types. So now we will walk through some of the types of sleeping structures and general costs and talk about the different things that jurisdictions would need to think about or community-based organizations would need to think about and their relative costs and such. So the first that we'll look at are conventional type buildings. This might be a former warehouse or an open space, or it could be a former motel or residential care facility, or some other type of new construction where the design is specific for operating a shelter. And these sorts of conventional buildings usually have individual or in communal dining facilities instead of individual kitchens. They often have communal meeting rooms to do workshops or case management, and then recreational areas, both indoor and out. And the setup costs vary depending on the size of the facility, whether it's new construction, what level of rehab it requires. And this is why the range that we've given you is so wide. We're working on a project in where we are using a former nursing home, a residential care facility that we are leasing, but it does need some rehab. And so the county's contribution to the rehab is about $2.5 million. And it will house 90 people per night when it's open. But if we were to purchase a new piece of land and plan for a shelter for about 150 people, it could cost in the neighborhood of $15 million to purchase and rehab that facility. Similarly, the costs per unit vary depending on the structure, the number of people who will be housed there, the level of staffing that's appropriate for the target population. And you will see as part of the materials for your agenda today, we included an off-agenda report that the Office of Supportive Housing sent to the Board of Supervisors earlier this year. And it showed the cost per unit per night for various shelters throughout Santa Clara County. And they range anywhere from about $44 per night to about $134 per night. And that report also discusses all the different variables that can impact that cost. And we think that for this type of building, whether it's leasing this kind of structure or purchasing this type of structure, once the site is identified and the financing is in place, it can take anywhere from 1 to 5 years to come online. And some of the things that impact that are making sure that you're doing the due diligence on the land use for the facility. Is it intended to have some sort of residential component, or is there any sort of exception in the code that allows an industrial building to be used as an emergency shelter? Or do you have to request some sort of change to the land use? And then looking at other policy considerations like whether the level of supportive services at the site is going to trigger the state level residential care facility licensing requirements. So those are the sorts of things with this type of conventional building that you would need to look into in order to establish this kind of site. Another option to offer safe places for sleeping are more unconventional structures, is what I called them here. And these include things like tiny houses or micro houses, or RVs or other structures on wheels. And again, the setup costs can vary depending on the types of units and the cost per unit. They also, the site infrastructure and how much needs to be done to establish infrastructure on the site, things like connecting to an electrical power source or connecting to water utilities impacts the setup costs, as well as any costs related to acquiring land. Things that impact from a policy or regulatory perspective are if it's a tiny house on wheels or an RV, that would be governed by the vehicle code versus governed by building code. And so thinking about those considerations and which regulatory agency you get approvals from. One example of a project like this is that the county is working right now on establishing an emergency shelter for families with children at the Civic Center campus. And we have a piece of land that eventually will be redeveloped, but is available for a couple of years. And so on that site, we are putting in 25 micro houses, and they are, the vendor that we've chosen to put in the houses is called Pallet, and they have really affordable, functional shelters to use for a situation like this. And then we're working with them and a subcontractor to establish a solar microgrid so that we don't have to connect into the main power grid. That is saving us time and saving us money, because when the lifetime of the site availability expires, we can pick up the whole package and move it to another site if another site were to be available. And the setup costs for that project, which include site preparation, grading, fencing and gate lighting, and all the structure and signage, are about $1.5 million. And once we figured all the pieces out, so this project, I think from concept, has taken us about a year and a half. But if we had a piece of land and had to do it all over again, I think that we could establish a site like this in 3 to 6 months. And that would include the manufacturing time and delivery time of the product, but also going through all the regulatory checks and balances that we need to have. One of the advantages that the county has in this project is that we have the Board of Supervisors declared a shelter crisis, and under state law that allows us certain flexibility if we have a local ordinance, shelter crisis ordinance, that allows flexibility with certain requirements under the building code. And so that has helped streamline a lot of the process to put this site into place that otherwise would take more time. So our next option for safe places for sleeping is motels. And motels can happen in two kinds of arrangements, either rented rooms by the night in the usual market. And in those instances, rates can be a little higher. And one of the challenges in implementation is that in order for the hotels and motels not to establish tenancy for the people who are staying there, they require that people have to move each month. Alternately, one of the things that we've been able to do in the COVID landscape is lease blocks of rooms at hotels. And because we are leasing blocks of rooms, the rates are fixed at a reasonable COVID rate, and participants can stay for as long as the program allows them to stay. And so it doesn't require folks and the operators of the program to shuffle around every month, which we have done, but it's so much easier to do it without. And you can see there the cost per unit. The time frame to establish this is as listed here as 3 to 9 months, but if you have an operator in the ready who has staffing and can take it on, or in this time of COVID, we've had disaster service workers we could put into place much faster than you could do it faster than this. But 3 months gives, if you were to contract with community-based organization, that's usually in the time that they need to hire the minimum level of staff to operate something like this. Another type of safe place for sleeping is safe parking. And safe parking, it's the best program name because it describes just what it is. It's a parking lot where people can sleep safely without being ticketed on the streets if there are regulations about overnight parking. All of the safe parking programs offer hygiene and sanitation facilities, and most offer some sort of meals and case management services. The setup costs are relatively low. So the costs to set up a safe parking lot are really about things like purchasing extra trash cans, deposits for equipment, or if in the cases of safe parking that allows RVs, making sure that you have carbon monoxide detectors. So I think $50,000 would be a really high setup cost, and a lot with special circumstances around it. And the cost per unit is significantly less than shelter in a building, and so that is advantageous as well. And we have Kimberly Thomas from the city of Mountain View with us, and she's going to talk about how Mountain View has set up safe parking in the past 2 years. They have really done an excellent job at establishing a robust safe parking program using public land in Mountain View. So, Kimberly.
Let me see if I'm doing a sound check and seeing if I'm being heard.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much. It's always so hard when you're in your house, right? Thank you so much, Chair Chavez, task force members, and the County Office of Supportive Housing staff for offering a chance for us to briefly share Mountain View's approach. Also, thank you to my council member, Ramirez, who is serving on this committee. As you've seen by the helpful data Hillary has shared with the task force, the number of individuals and families without a home is a very complex issue. For Mountain View, over the last 4 years, we have been studying this issue and taking many actions to address the challenging rise in homelessness in Mountain View. Over the past 3 county point-in-time counts for Mountain View, just to give you an idea of scale, the number of homelessness in Mountain View has increased from 276 in 2015 to 416 in 2017, and then 606 in 2019, more than doubling over this time period. The vast majority of people who were counted were unsheltered, and for Mountain View, this tracks with our own data because we do street-by-street counts of individuals that are living in vehicles, hence our focus on things like safe parking. And for Mountain View, this has ranged over the last 3 years at between 200 and 300 vehicles that show signs of habitation. The Mountain View Council has been addressing this need head on and looking at all options. This process has enabled us to really rally some resources associated with safe parking in rapid response to the COVID crisis. We also want to highlight that we really do appreciate our nearly 4-year partnership with the county to address various impacts of homelessness for people living in vehicles in Mountain View as well. We've established effective partnerships with the county that really manage a number of these programs. We do provide various targeted revenue sharing with the county. We really have felt that that has shown how we can maximize those resources and increase those positive outcomes over time. In the space specifically of safe parking that I was asked to speak about tonight, our partnership with the county and the local nonprofit MOVE that we have worked together to facilitate a development of our own nonprofit in the city of Mountain View has resulted in the city 4 years ago, a little about 4.5 years ago, having no responses to an RFP that we had on the street at the time, to now where we are at today, which is being the largest safe parking provider in the county. So it's been quite a journey for us, and that has been in large part due to our direct partnership with various CBOs, including Project We Hope that I also see here, as well as the county, on making that happen. On an average evening in Mountain View at this time, we are hosting 130 individuals 24/7 at one of the city's 5 safe parking lots. This process was established in the city of Mountain View through a lot of support on behalf of our city council with some infrastructure costs that were subsumed by the city of Mountain View. And we've taken the lead role in securing the lots, doing the lot preparation. As Hillary highlighted earlier, there are areas where it can be more costly. We took on a lot that was unfinished, meaning it wasn't even paved, it wasn't meant to be a parking lot. That was more difficult for us, and it was more costly. So there are different costs, but on the whole, it's a very cost-efficient operation to be able to assist many folks. We've designed specific standards also within our community to meet our community standards, and we did this by adopting a safe parking ordinance for Mountain View. It's one of few in the state, and it is one that really aligns well with our planning and land use standards. We've done a number of additional activities, and really, I think a core of our strategy has been collaborating to figure out the ways that we can maximize our resources, which are limited. Like most cities, we don't have a direct funding stream for homeless services, and so we do what we can with the resources we have. We've utilized a number of interesting financing mechanisms, like using public benefit funding, et cetera. But that is kind of a high-level overview of what we've done on safe parking. And I would be happy to also answer any questions if you have any about safe parking. And I encourage you, if you'd like to learn more, to check out mountainview.gov/homeless. It talks a lot about the city of Mountain View's journey. I thank you really for the opportunity to briefly present on this item tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much. Hillary, do we want to go back to you?
Yes, thanks, Kimberly.
Of course, Hillary.
And one thing that I will note about the county's partnership with Mountain View is that with the community-based organization Move Mountain View, the county did intend and to operate safe parking lots in the North County area with faith organizations and congregations. And so Move was charged with identifying those lots and had a target to set. And with the city's help, we were able to fast track the number of people that we could serve, because they were able to open larger lots under their control. And then also with their funding, they were able to enhance the services provided at each of the safe parking sites in Mountain View. So the county's contribution is mostly for the basic operations of the site, but Mountain View's contribution of funding really made it possible to offer the level of case management that we should be offering to the people staying on those lots. So the next type of intervention or safe place for sleeping is talking about sanctioned encampments. And the way that we are defining sanctioned encampments is that they're land set up where people can sleep in tents or other structures without being cited or abated. Tents would be the most usual sanctioned encampment situation. And hygiene and sanitation services would be provided. I think in the cost that I have put here, we would also expect that case management services would be provided. And so similar to safe parking, we would have similar setup costs. You might need a fence, you would need sanitation facilities, and then you would have to pay for those sanitation facilities and the services and oversight if you wanted it operated by a community-based organization. And then I think that other things to consider here are policy related and land use related. Is the land a piece of land that could be used to develop an indoor sleeping space or permanent housing of some sort? Do the regulations of the jurisdiction allow for outdoor sleeping in that way? And a number of other considerations would need to go into setting up a sanctioned encampment in that way. And so that's the program type. The next thing we wanted to talk about that could be provided to improve quality of life for people who are unhoused is support for basic needs. And I think that Member Shaw the other night called this something like communitarian zones, that I like that name, stuck with me. But this would mean providing easy access to hygiene and sanitation facilities like toilets, hand washing, showers and laundry, food, garbage removal, transportation, and healthcare are also things that fall under support for basic needs. And depending on the box that I have here in terms of cost and time frame is related specifically to shower services, because we've asked Pastor Paul Baines from Project We Hope to talk a little bit about their Dignity on Wheels program, which is a mobile shower service. So Pastor Baines, you are up.
Thank you, Hillary, and thank you, Supervisor Chavez and task force council members and all those involved in helping the less fortunate of our society. Yes, we are proud to be a partner with many of the cities in the Santa Clara County, starting off with Palo Alto all the way to Gilroy, and specifically working with Hillary and her team and Linda Jones to address and help provide the basic right that everyone should have. I'm sure most of you have had your shower or bath today, or definitely had one yesterday, but the homeless don't always have access to clean water. And so we are proud with the relationship that we do have with the county on where you're helping us to help the less fortunate and provide that shower where it changes the mindset of the homeless, where before they might say, I'm dirty, I'm in an unclean state, and I don't want to go and to my mental health appointment. I don't want to go look for a job. I don't want to go look for a house or any type of shelter because people will make fun of me when I get on public transportation. I can't call an Uber. My relatives don't want me because they feel I stink, to put it candidly. And so when Hillary and the city of San Jose also asked us to support these efforts, of course, this is what we do. We run a homeless shelter as well, but our mobile hygiene services that we provide is in 4 counties in 16 cities, but specifically addressing the Civic Center project, which is, I believe, is going to be a signature project for the county of Santa Clara, where you are providing very low-cost shelter to get those out of harm's way. We also provide the hand washing stations, which we place throughout the county because when COVID hit, the libraries, the Boys and Girls Clubs, places where the homeless would gather to wash and clean up, those were shut down, and some of them are still shut down. And so we are able, because we are mobile, we're able to travel with our mobile units by providing showers, laundry services where we can wash their clothes, as well as restrooms and case management. And we partnered with Hillary's team specifically for the Civic Center project, where we will be providing showers and laundry services 7 days a week on that particular project. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Any questions?
Thank you, Pastor Baines. I think the other thing that I wanted to highlight and did through the slide is that the varying availability of setup costs depends on whether, for example, if a jurisdiction were to work with Dignity on Wheels directly, whether they have capacity in their fleet available or if they needed to buy a new unit, so that the $0 to $150,000 reflects that. And then often the way that we contract with them is we schedule a session for about 4 hours, and it has, depending on the vehicle, a capacity for the number of showers or loads of laundry that can happen, and it usually costs in the neighborhood of $20 per person per session. And again, depending on when the contract gets in place and whether or not Project We Hope needs to purchase a new vehicle or trailer, 3 to 6 months is usually the turnaround time to set up something like that. And then each of the other types of hygiene and basic needs options would have varying costs depending on the type of service and the number of people targeted to be served.
Hillary, could I say?
Sure.
I was just wanted to add, when we have a contract in place, then we're able to respond very rapidly. We have a fleet of 10 trailers and 9 trucks. And so once the contract is there, then we end up being able to support for either a 4-hour day or 8-hour day, depending upon if we're hooking up to local amenities such as the water, and we can dump the black and gray water on site at that particular facility. That is where we're able to do rapid responses, and not just within a encampment, but also for emergency response as we responded to the San Jose floods and actually the Santa Cruz fires and the Santa Rosa fires and what have you. So we're also used in emergency repair, or not emergency response situation. Thank you, Hillary.
Thank you. So there are also additional types of supports that can help unhoused people with immediate needs, and those include setting up outreach teams to serve the jurisdiction, and outreach teams can provide basic needs support or also work on client engagement and case finding. And the client engagement and case finding piece is essential when you have a new development, permanent housing development coming into your jurisdiction or area. The engagement teams can do outreach to make sure that the people who are unhoused in that area are part of the coordinated assessment community queue, and that once their name is up for a referral to permanent housing, they can be found again. Also, outreach can be done through compassionate enforcement and staffing in police departments. There are a couple of cities within the county who have an outreach component on their police force. And then creating welcoming spaces in libraries, community centers, and other places is also another support option, as well as training to local community-based organizations and service providers in housing problem solving and other resources and tools for helping get people connected to housing. And to talk about how their city has implemented outreach services, we have Rebecca Garcia from the city of Morgan Hill.
Good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you so much, Hillary. I'm very happy to be here with you all. I'm Rebecca Garcia, Housing Manager for the City of Morgan Hill. Thank you to my Mayor, Rich Constantine, and Councilwoman Yvonne Martinez Beltran for also being on this task force. Having their support is really instrumental in how we shape our housing program, so thank you. As Kimberly mentioned, this is an incredibly complex issue, but I will try to very succinctly tell you what we're doing in Morgan Hill. So I know the focus of this task force is really on emergency solutions. In response to a rise in homelessness in South County in 2017, based on our homeless point in time count, we really ramped up our efforts to think about what are the immediate steps that we needed to take. And whatever I recommend to my council as a staff member has to have a path towards a better future for the people that we are serving. So even if we're talking about an emergency need, we are always thinking about what the end game is and what the outcome is at the end of the day, which of course we all could agree is definitely housing. So one of the first things we did was provide some funding to the county's Office of Supportive Housing Homeless Outreach Team. This has been one of my favorite things. It's a contract through a BOD that the county OSH has, and the outreach workers are literally in our streets talking to, building a relationship with, pouring a cup of coffee, a glass of ice water on a cold day, building that relationship and rapport with the homeless individual and family as a first step. And then their other primary goal is to really utilize the county's assessment tool to make sure that that individual or family ends up in the coordinated assessment queue that Hillary talked about. So the coordinated assessment is a tool, basically an interview with the homeless individual that asks them questions around their medical and social risk factors, how old they are, how long have they been homeless, et cetera, et cetera. The outreach workers actually work directly with me and our city housing team, not just housing team, they're really integrated into every single city housing department. So they could be getting a referral from Parks and Rec, they could be getting a referral from PD. I mean, we're a small city, so we literally see homeless individuals. We'll literally pull over, call, text message, email, and say, we see an encampment here, we see a homeless individual here, and then they'll start to engage with them. Why is that important for us locally? It makes us feel like we have some control and some say. And then when the homeless individual, when the county actually finds housing for that homeless individual through the elaborate system that Hillary talked about, that same outreach worker has the lucky job of going back and finding that individual in Morgan Hill or in any city in the county, and then letting them know that they have housing. So for us, the assessment tool is just like the number one building block, a very, very important step. So we will do that at emergency shelter. We will do it at our safe park. We will do it in anytime we build a new construction project. We want to make sure that we build up that list in South County so that the people that are homeless in our local South County communities have an opportunity to actually get into those programs and units. So number two, we also implemented a safe park program. It's been going on for about 3 years now. This is a really great partnership. It actually started with our police department, really wanting to be helpful and not give tickets. And they're like, we really want to do something. What can we all do that we're comfortable with? So we talked to the faith-based community and had a really good, honest, open dialogue about what size are we comfortable with? What population do we want to serve? So we ended up creating an 8-space, which 8 spaces may not sound like a lot, but I really want to encourage small cities to do every little effort that you possibly can. 8 car spaces for families is 30 people a night. So 30 people a night stay there. They get everything from case management, which is what the city pays for. We actually contract with the Compassion Center in Gilroy to pay for the case management. The church takes care of everything from meals and hygiene kits, and there's a beautiful library there for the kids. And although it's a safe park program, they can actually stay there for a significant period of time, as long as they're working with their case managers and, being a part of the goals that they set for themselves. So we're super proud of that program. We've had a lot of really good success. We think the most important piece is the case management that's been provided by the Compassion Center. Those people are awesome. They work through issues from DMV to court issues to helping folks get better paying jobs. So case management, extremely important. The third thing is we opened up an inclement cold weather shelter in 2019. We decided to focus on single men. It's just 10 spaces for single men. Again, another partnership with a church, Community Christian Church. The city pays for the security guard overnight, and Community Christian Church volunteers have taken the lead on everything from volunteers to meals to setup to cleanup. So that's been successful so far as well. And again, we try to partner with Gilroy every chance we can. We're really starting to try to look at this as a regional issue and kind of focus on our South County region. And so because they have the Compassion Center, they're also coordinating our referral process. So everything we do, whether it's the cold weather shelter or the safe parking program, they're really serving individuals from Gilroy and Morgan Hill. What is important to us as a small city is we think about continuing to build our housing program, maintaining community support. How do we do this? We talk to our community, listen to them, and solve the problem. And sometimes we do have problems, whether it's a new construction project or a safe parking program. Sometimes there's some bumps in the road in the beginning, but we stay really active and engaged. And a lot of times it's easy to fix if you just stay accountable and involved and listen to the neighbors on whatever issue they have, and then resolve it and get back to them. So there's a lot of accountability built in all of our programs. And to the extent that we can, we target, market, and outreach to our local South County homeless folks. So whether we're building a new construction project or creating a safe park program, how we talk about this to the community, we really try to characterize it as solving our local South County homeless problem. And what are we looking to do next? I will just put a plug in that we think our next building block is a case manager / social worker. We'd like to see that type of role join our team. And we also need transportation. So I think I will end there because I was told I have 5 minutes.
Thanks, Rebecca. And one of the one of the things I wanted to highlight for the task force was that the coordinated assessment system that Rebecca talked so enthusiastically about is described in one of the reports that we attached to the meeting agenda for today. So it's a report an off-agenda report we sent to the Board of Supervisors a few years ago, but the processes are the same, and the content and underlying foundation of the coordinated assessment system are the same. And so if you wanted to learn more about that system that we've referenced a few times, which includes the DAT assessment that we've also talked about, then the information is in that report.
And Hillary, I'll mention one more thing that's kind of always surprises me about Morgan Hill is we're such an incredibly lean organization. We literally have 2 housing staff members, myself and Christy Thomas, and our fearless leader, Leslie Little, who's an assistant city manager. But it's basically the 3 of us creating all of these things in partnership with the community. So we have to utilize every single resource we possibly can. And as Kimberly mentioned, we have absolutely 0 funding for homeless services. So partnering with everybody that we can, including the county, is incredibly important.
Thank you. Thanks, Rebecca, and good to see you again. And Hillary, Hillary, I'm gonna wrap this section up. Is that right? Are we done with this now? This section?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And the reason is what I'd like to do, colleagues, is I'd like to go to the public, and I know we've been speaking at you for an hour, and I'm going to get the public input, and then what we'd like to do is see if there are any questions or comments on this section while we still have some of our presenters with us. Then we'll go on to having a discussion about funding. So what I'd like to do is go to our public speakers, and I'll ask the clerk if you can call on each person. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You will have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good evening, everyone. Scott Largent. This is interesting information to kind of sit back and process. I have listened to this now for 5 years. Everything that we're talking about has been discussed over and over and over again. I guess we're in damage control right now because it's gotten so out of control. Is there some floodgate that's going to open from having these meetings where we're going to get federal funding? Why now? That's where I'm wondering. Our county is starting to reopen, and what I wondered is for 6 months why we really didn't step up to the plate for the people that were on the streets. A lot of them are really bad now. Like really, really bad, because you left them alone. They didn't have water. They didn't have adequate washing stations. They didn't have bathrooms. They also didn't have protection from the law, like as in backing them up. Right over there near Spring Street, we had a homicide that happened 2 or 3 days ago. The media reported it as happening next to the jail. Well, it was in one of the largest homeless encampments now in California, which is down the street from our county building. I have a storage unit across from that hellhole over there, and it is not safe. People have attempted to jump me. Same thing happened basically closer towards the jail. It's just a rough area, and you're constantly getting sized up. You're constantly getting people trying to get over on you. And the worst part about it is the women that park in their Mercedes Benzes over near Spring Street over there, because that's the safest place for them to get away from their abuser. San Jose PD was told to stand down and not patrol over there. I want you to know that, Cindy. Okay? They were told to stand down. Somebody was killed there. People have been raped there. There's people with COVID in the middle of that field. Why is there no law enforcement? Why is there no services?
Our next speaker is Bruce Roberts. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking. Bruce, are you there? You're on mute. Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Robert Aguirre. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Yeah, I appreciate the presentation that was made, and it's the same presentation that gets made all the time. But as far as the unsanctioned or sanctioned encampments that we're talking about, the cost is extremely low, and it's extremely quick to set up. Basically, all we need is land and a fence around it, and everything else is an amenity. If we can get water, if we can get porta potties, if we can get a trash bin, those are all pluses. But we can get these things set up right away. And as far as having somebody there overlooking it, having some security, it's crazy. We don't have any security right now over most of the camps. Most of the people that are in them police themselves and keep everything under control. Yes, we have occasional outbreaks where somebody does something, but I mean, you get that even in the house community. You can't control what people do, but you can just try to control the people that are within the encampment and keep them safe. The other thing about safe park programs, you're talking about the same thing about having people come in there and provide security. I ran the Bellarmine Safe Park program for 3 years, never had any security there. Ran 2 others in throughout the county and never had any security there. As a matter of fact, one of them was occasionally patrolled by the sheriff's department, and they never ever had a single incident with anybody in the parking in that safe park program. So I think the idea of trying to push forth the of having security over the people that are staying there is a ridiculous proposition, and it's an expense that we don't need to make. It's money that we can be spent on other things. All these programs, safe park programs that I'm aware of that are run by churches do not require $50,000, and most of the people that are staying them don't need case management. They're people that are working, that they leave the park and go to work, and they come back in the evening and have a safe place to stay. And if they get a meal, that's a bonus, but not all of them have that, which is okay. But we don't need to spend a whole lot of money on
Our next speaker is Bruce Roberts. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking. Bruce?
There you go.
Bruce, go ahead.
This is Leanna Crabtree, and I have accepted the unmute. I'm not sure if you were expecting me to speak or someone else.
Sure, go ahead, Liana.
Thank you. My name is Leanna Crabtree. I'm a resident of Santa Clara County. I appreciate the meeting that you're having today to discuss the resources that are available for emergency, urgent humanitarian aid for the unhoused population. We have seen over the recent years that the problem of inadequate housing only grows. And I feel that on the resource side, you really need to be addressing the root cause of the problem, specifically the financialization of the housing supply. I have sent my comments in writing today with a number of resources for those who are less familiar with the problem of the financialization of the housing supply, how to become more informed, including I highly recommend the film called Push. It is available for streaming through the Roxy Theater, their virtual cinema. I've included that link in my communication. Specifically regarding financialization of the housing supply, I would hope that you will acknowledge that, that the financialization of the housing supply is a significant driver of local and worldwide homelessness and housing insecurity, leading to 1.6 billion people worldwide, including 9,700 people in Santa Clara County residents, living in inadequate housing. The financialization of the housing supply and its dependence on deregulation of housing markets creates property investment tools, mortgage-backed securities, real estate investment trusts, for example, that serve as asset holders for legitimate use, such as pension funds, but also as havens for laundered money, including money hidden from tax obligation and money obtained through trafficking of drugs, weapons, and humans. Unfortunately, when housing becomes a commodity, homes are valued for their investment potential, sometimes or often to the exclusion of their necessary and intended use as providers of shelter for humans.
Our next speaker is B. Beekman. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thanks for the meeting today. You were talking about microgrids earlier, and that got me thinking about the good uses and purposes of local community energy at this time. And the thoughts of local community energy got me thinking about, defund issues and how it's all interconnected to how we consider the future of mixed income housing ideas and very low income housing ideas and extremely low income housing ideas. These have been, kind of difficult subject matter in this post-COVID era that we started. But pre-COVID, those terms were coming along really nicely, and they were becoming a lot more acceptable and friendly and familiar and just, easy to talk about. And that seems to have been a bit, stunted at this time, and we're trying to talk about it again and trying to put it in context. And, the COVID is going to last only for a few more years, and I really hope that we can continue our good practices before COVID-19 and consider, what mixed income housing really can introduce to all of us. And it's a really interesting future, I feel. And I don't think we need to be afraid of that. And I guess we're at a time just to prep ourselves and prepare ourselves not to be afraid of that now again. And I hope we can do that. And very low income and extremely low income housing has to be just terms that are more familiar and easier for us to say, and more acceptable. And it has to learn that has to be a considerable difference compared to other affordable housing, tiers that are a bit, $70,000, $80,000 tiers is pretty high. And we have to learn to accept that. Thank you.
We'll try Bruce one more time. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking. Bruce, go ahead.
Bruce, we're not able to hear you.
That concludes our speakers, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to go back and let me just remind folks how we're going to do this. Well, I'm going to take comments and questions on this item. Then we're going to talk about funding streams, because I know that's really important. I also just wanted to call your attention to a number of responses that are in your packet for your review, because I know people asked a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and go to each of you. And for those of you who joined us a little bit late and missed the roll call, if you could send a note to the clerk, just letting the clerk know what time you arrived, that would be helpful. And you can do that by responding back to the, I think to the link that we sent you for the meeting would be great. All right, so we'll start with Lisa.
Hi, good evening, folks. First off, I would like to state that as an unhoused person myself, and I take great offense to people saying that people are not being served. I myself, being unhoused, go out with another member here and deliver food 3 times a week. We deliver water on hot days. The city and the county has been helping a lot with that. And I take great offense to the fact that we work really hard to go out and service these people that are at Spring and Heading and A7 and all these other things. And I think credit needs to be given where credit is due. And these people are being serviced. They are getting shower trailers 3 days a week. St. James Parks gets overserviced. A lot of places do get overserviced, as a matter of fact. And just wanted to put that out there. Thank you. Oh, I did want to ask one more question, if it's okay. What are the level for the Kimberly that spoke about the safe parking in, I believe it was Morgan Hill? What is the level of your casework that you're doing?
Currently, our ratio we have approximately, we're getting ready to build up to nearly 100 participants. And so our ratio is roughly 25 per case manager. We are ramping up to that, and that is all being facilitated through partnership contracts with the county.
And what do they do as far, is it intensive case management or just check-in case management?
It's required per our ordinance, and so it's a basic requirement of the program. So, if someone didn't want case management services, this wouldn't be the program for them.
Right.
But it is. I don't know if I'd call it intense case management, but it is a routine process where they need to check in. There's a pathway that's given them. The assessment process occurs. All the standard processes, and that really also helps us because Mountain View Council is trying to ensure that they're learning how to better serve the residents in need of Mountain View.
Mountain View. I'm sorry, Mountain View, Morgan
no
Hill. I
worries.
got confused.
And in Morgan Hill,
All right,
it's
thank
very
you very
similar.
much.
Thank you, Lisa.
Oh, okay. I knew there was somebody from Morgan Hill there that was talking about the safe park.
It is
Okay,
very
great. Thank you. You answered my questions, ladies. Thank you very much.
All right, Council Member Dominguez.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the time. My question is around the VISP DAT and the assessment tool that is used by the county in order to place our unhoused population into the system that does populate a wait list per se for those who are unhoused in our communities. I know that the report, as I reviewed it, did have 50 access points that I believe encompass the EAN. However, I don't believe that there is 50 access points in the city of Milpitas. So I have a couple of questions in regards to that, because I do feel that smaller cities, if they don't have that support to identify an unhoused and place them into the EAN, then the VISP DAT is not really measuring the needs, and may actually, some of the feedback that I have heard from our unhoused is that it's placing people in the wrong housing units, especially if they're being placed first in rapid rehousing and then moving them into permanent housing. So my first question is, does the VISP DAT measure unhoused populations, or is people who are incarcerated? For example, in the city of Milpitas, we have Elmwood Correctional Center, and our team in our office has identified over 75 members that have unfortunately become unhoused after they have been released from custody. So my question is, are those in custody considered homeless, and do they rate high on the VISP DAT? That's my first question.
I'm going to ask Hillary, is that a question for you or for Consuelo? Or Catherine?
I can answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So people who are in custody and who were homeless before they entered custody, there's a particular form of the VISP DAT that is a comparative VISP DAT to the one for people who aren't in custody. And so in terms of how they they score similarly to people who are not in custody and who have similar characteristics.
Okay, so just for point of clarification, are those in custody considered unhoused or homeless while they're in custody?
When it comes to using certain of our financial resources, it depends on how long they've been in custody. So if they've been in custody for 90 days or longer, there are certain resources that we cannot use to help house them, but other resources have more flexibility.
Thank you.
I should also add that when it comes time to verifying somebody's chronically homeless status, which is what we use for permanent supportive housing, it may have an impact in the timeline of them being housed, but the amount of time in custody shouldn't impact their utilization of emergency shelters and similar services.
But does it impact their rating on the VISP DAT?
No, it should not impact their score. No.
It should not, but does it in some cases?
I would have to look at those specific cases. I don't think so, because the questions are asked about their housing situation outside of incarceration, which is one of the factors that's measured.
Okay, thank you so much, Hillary, for that answer, because it leads me to my second question in terms of, I wanted just point of clarification, the VISP that is done by a social worker, not a clinician, correct?
It can be done by any service provider. And it's the information and how we use it in our community is based on self-report.
Right, so the self-report can't be prompt. So for example, if you ask an unhoused person who is not in a mental state to even know what time of day it is, if you say, how long have you been unhoused, you can't prompt it. So you have to go, so if they're in the city of Milpitas, for example, that unhoused may not think of the time they were unhoused, maybe in a different city. So they may just respond a year when maybe they've been unhoused more than a year in another city, but you can't prompt that question. Is that correct?
If the worker knows the person, then if the person doing the questioning knows the person, they could say something like, but when I met you 2 years ago, I think that you were unhoused also. So are you sure it's just a year? So they can ask exploring questions, I would say.
Okay, perfect. I guess just my concern again is just that folks are not getting the EAN support and they're just not being placed correctly and they're not being assessed correctly. I did review the reports and I did not find any information in regards to the number of unhoused, which was a question that I had asked at the last meeting in regards to Milpitas. And so that's really important to me because we have 2 housing projects that may be supported by Measure A or fundings from the state. And so at this point, I just want to make sure that those who are ranking high on the VISP DAT in Milpitas also have a chance. But it doesn't sound like many of our unhoused that we have identified, at least through our office, have even been placed in the EAN. So if I could have a number of people who have been identified in Milpitas, I would greatly appreciate that information. If not, then there is some inequities in the system of placement to begin with. And I do believe that's something that we need to address. And I'm not too sure if that's with this body. And if it's not, then I would kindly ask for some direction, Chair, to move into that space, because I do believe that it is really, really important for us to assess our unhoused correctly, just to make sure that those unhoused that live in those cities and are ranking high in that VISP DAT, that they also have a fair chance in the housing that will be provided in the future. Thank you so much both for your time.
I'm not sure I entirely understand, Councilmember Dominguez, the problem that you've outlined, but I want to just make a recommendation. And that is, I'm going to ask our housing staff to have a conversation with your housing staff, with you, Councilmember, because it might help to better understand for both parties to better understand what is or isn't happening in Milpitas. And it sounds like it's just something we need to get to the bottom of, and if that's all right as a next step.
Yeah,
and perhaps, I'm sorry, if it's appropriate, I would invite Vice Mayor Nunez, since you're both on the committee, and that way you're both getting information, and we'll try to make that happen before the next meeting. Okay?
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it.
You bet. You bet. Member Shaw?
So I had a question about the shelter, the shelter population with limited stay. So if you have like a, limited days that you can stay at a shelter, how does that affect, the homeless population once like someone's stay at the shelter ends, then where are they supposed to go? Also, I had a comment about what Robert Geary said about the sanctioned encampment costs. I also believe that the costs aren't as significant. as a lot of other options. And I was wondering if there are currently sanctioned encampments on property that the county owns, and if that is true, or if that is the case, are you able to use like the shelter crisis criteria to kind of skip over, I don't know, rules or regulations that, you know, might prohibit someone from setting up encampments on other properties that aren't owned by the county? And also the interim housing. So I'm just trying to really look at the numbers. You know, I really don't see the numbers of housing units or the numbers of shelter beds or anything that's, you know, being built or put forward, how that's going to keep up with the number of homeless people that are expected to, you know, join the homeless pool, like in these years to come. Like I said before, it just seems like we're behind, and we're going to keep dragging behind because, I mean, it's going to take a significant, you know, amount of housing to, you know, house individuals, or a significant amount of shelter beds to shelter individuals that are currently homeless, and then those that are going to become homeless in the future.
So I'm not sure again if this is Hillary, Consuelo, or Catherine, but the first question was, when you have facilities that have just short-term stays and people don't have a chance to, I mean, if they're getting pushed out on the street, essentially they're becoming homeless again. And isn't that a challenge with having short-term facilities? I think that's the question, Jerome. Did I get that right? Hillary?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, I would agree that it is a challenge, and so as much as possible, we hope to not have strict limits on stays in certain shelters. I think that one of the challenges is that different shelters have different regulations that apply to them based on local or state requirements and the funding sources. And so that may be a driver to the length of time that somebody can stay in shelters. What we do know from our data is that on average, people who exit to permanent housing from a shelter situation exit in about 120 days. And so that's a time frame that if we have to impose a time frame, we look at. But there are multiple instances of people who have stayed in shelter for well over that time frame, 310 days out of the year, for example, in some of the shelters and some of our data. And so I think it's a shelter by shelter basis if we look at it.
And then the second question was, when we're costing out encampments, or I'm sorry, not just on cost, but does the county have any sanctioned encampments on our property? And to my knowledge, the answer to that is no. Is that accurate, Hillary?
That is.
Okay.
I think that is accurate.
And then your point, Jerome, about how do we possibly keep up? We're so behind. You're totally right. There's no getting around that. And part of the reason I think Supervisor Cortese wanted us to convene is I think he's recognizing that while we're building with the dollars that we have, that we absolutely need to have an interim plan, and that's why we're talking about it. So you're right. I'm going to go to Lee and then to Kelsey.
All right, thank you. I just had a couple of main comments, and one of them is like going along with Member Reeves was saying. I think the public, I mean, the unhoused are getting a very negative, people are seeing, the public is getting a very negative perception of the unhoused. I go out there 4 times a week to distribute food to the unhoused. mainly Spring Street, where somebody was talking about. You know, I go out there sometime by myself. The majority of the people out there that's unhoused, they're very appreciative of people coming out there, the help they get. You know, they're very appreciative of it. And there's not every now and then there might be some violence, like the murder that happened a few days ago. But that's not an everyday thing, and it's not violence out there. I haven't heard of no rapes. It might be, but I haven't heard of anything. I think the public is getting a very negative perception of the unhoused, and I think that's something, an issue that needs addressing. Because as long as they get that negative perception, it's going to respond very negative, especially with the sanctioned encampments. You know, and I think I spoke on this. Well, you guys spoke on last time. When people get help, they respond to it good. You know, better. And also, I want to comment on Pastor Baines. I think it is a need for more showers out there because people that can help build their confidence back up. You know, because a lot of people unhoused feel neglected. They feel like pushed to the side. You know, they're out there. Everybody's not out there because of drugs or anything like this. A lot of reasons they're out there, and I just think that's something that needs addressing. Um, and then again, the negative. Yeah. Oh, and the tiny homes. Is there any date when those tiny homes are going to open?
The ones at the county in particular, Consuelo, do you know the date?
December.
December? Oh, okay. Thank you. That's all I have right now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kelsey?
My lights.
Thank
The
you.
hell?
So I had two questions. The first was if we have any data on, in addition to bed capacity, bed utilization. I know from my time doing case management that there are certain places where I know I can always get a bed, but people don't always want to stay there. So I would be interested as we're thinking through these different models and choices, if there might be options that appear cheaper per bed, but might not be as cheap if we're looking at like heads and beds. So I would be curious if we have that data. And then my second question is around safe parking, and is maybe for the safe parking providers. So I'm interested in the policy that I think was used in Mountain View and was definitely the policy in Palo Alto, that people have to leave during the day and then come back. As I understand it, that hasn't been the policy during COVID. But I'm curious what the origins of that policy are, assuming that post-COVID we would go back to that policy. Like, is it just a city decision, or are there other barriers to operating 24-hour safe parking facilities? And that's all.
If I may, through the chair, this is Consuelo. Great questions. We actually do have the data on capacity, and we have a couple of slides that we can share with the task force after this through the clerk of the board that show our utilization prior to COVID. And on Saturday, as Hillary mentioned to you all, the number of beds was reduced and the capacity was reduced because of COVID. And we can share with you the data behind not just the number of beds, but how many of those are actually utilized. And then to your second question, it's the Safe Park program is interesting. I was actually working for the city of Santa Barbara in 2003 or so when they were creating their program. And historically, it was a safe place for people to park. With not a lot of case management, definitely people needing to leave. And so that policy and that use of safe parking as an intervention to have people feel safe, a safe place to park has evolved. Prior to COVID, we were actually, the county in partnership with Mountain View was testing a 24/7 safe park program that accelerated because of COVID. So it will be interesting for us to explore. It does add cost to what historically or traditionally has been a low cost intervention to provide people a safe place to sleep at night. And so it will require some assessment for us in terms of cost and other, we'll get into a little bit of the financing after. And as you all start thinking about solutions, looking at it from what does it look like just safe parking overnight versus a 24/7 place for people to park.
I think, Consuelo, the one question about the nature of having people leave during the day versus staying, my observation of that has been that depending on the utilization of the safe parking site, that sometimes the parking that we're using is needed during the day. And for some institutions, it's partly how they make having conversations with the neighbors and how the neighborhoods are more accepting of the safe parking program. So I think you raise a good question about how we think about that and what we should or shouldn't fund as we think about that in the future.
Right, and it's a function of the co-location of uses. So for instance, in a church parking, there's services throughout the day. Congregations typically use their facilities for other nonprofit uses. So it is a function of what is operating there during the day and what is the neighborhood.
Councilmember Esparza shared, that when you have dual uses for a same site in our last meeting. I want to just be mindful of time. I know we had this meeting scheduled till 7:30. I have 5 other folks who would like to ask questions or make comments. I would like to make sure that we can get to at least having the staff present the funding issues. And so I'm going to ask the staff to be concise and also ask our questions to be direct as well, or our comments to be direct. I'm going to turn to Antonina and then to Teresa Neal, then to Mayor Sharp, and then to Councilmember Corrales.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. I have a couple of questions also, and we talk about interim housing, and I wanted to understand the number of people who need interim housing, those that have those vouchers that are waiting for the unit to be ready or just can't find a unit even. So how many have those vouchers? And then the other one I wanted to know is what's the average time a person has to wait for permanent housing when they have these vouchers? And that's all. Thank you.
I think, do you mean Section 8 vouchers, Antonina?
Whatever vouchers you're talking about, it sounds like with the interim housing, we're waiting. These are people who are waiting to get into permanent housing. So that was the terminology.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure because Catherine, I saw Catherine on here and it got my attention. Consuelo, can you respond to that?
Yes, and we can provide the data. I don't want to cite a number that's inaccurate, but it's basically folks that we have a capacity in our system of people shopping with vouchers, and this is separate than our project-based vouchers that we coordinate with the Housing Authority for Housing Development. So, Chairperson, if we can provide that information as a follow-up, just to make sure the numbers are correct.
I appreciate that. And then Catherine's nodding her head. Yes, we'll take a look at that. Antonina, did you have a second question? Okay, we'll make sure we follow up with that. Thank you. Teresa?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So my question has to do, I'm coming to have an even greater appreciation of the scope of the issues that we're dealing with and the range of people that have find themselves in a situation of being unhoused. When I've talked to some local providers that are providing assistance, one of the things that struck me was they talk about when people are forced to, when they lose their housing, because many of them start a physical and mental decline that maybe they didn't have at the beginning. So when I listen to the range of problems, I think, do we have a sense of how many folks are becoming, to be, mentally ill or to have mental health problems as a result of being forced out onto the streets? And maybe that's when their physical decline begins. It's almost like, are we just even, making our mental health care problems so much worse by not being able to help people to prevent, like I said, when those providers told me they've seen this time and again, this kind of unfortunate, tragic spiral. Do we have any sense of how many people that maybe that's what's happening, part of what we're making their problems so much worse by not being able to house them?
Yeah, go ahead, Consuelo.
Thank you. And I will frame it this way. When we look at the time that people are homeless, and to share with you the impact, we look at two things. One is chronological age, and the other is functional age, to give you a magnitude of the impact it does have on folks. So we deal with individuals who, while their chronological age is 50, from a health perspective, mental, physical, and everything that you mentioned, they are closer to 65. So if they've been on the streets for an extended period of time, they age quicker because of the mental health issues, because of the emotional impact of becoming homeless. We don't have the data in the way that you're framing it, but happy to follow up and give you some examples of how our unhoused population ages as a result of living on the streets.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor Sharp?
Oh, hi. Yeah, the slides about how much tiny houses cost and how long it takes, and motels, how long it takes, and you multiply the cost per day times 30 days in a month. And I'm just wondering, if you look at apartment rents in Silicon Valley, they've fallen quite a bit, and there's a pretty high vacancy rate. We're spending nearly twice as much on a tiny house per month as a 2-bedroom apartment at the high end of $178 a month. Is there any way we can just use money to rent some of these empty apartments instead of waiting up to 2 years for tiny houses?
And we do that, great question, Mayor. We do that through our scattered site program. And perhaps if I can ask Catherine as a follow-up to this committee, if maybe we can share with you the difference between our scattered site model, which uses those vouchers that the previous speaker spoke about or asked about, and share with you the different approaches in housing the unhoused population.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for the question. Councilmember Perales?
Yeah, thank you. And can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, and I know we're short on time. I'll just stick to the one issue, and it's I was, I guess, surprised to see this when we opened up our first tiny home location in San Jose. It took a lot longer than I had hoped to actually get it occupied. And I found that pretty surprising, considering the amount of work that we put in, literally the years of work and community engagement, community opposition, and then to have sites available but not be occupied quickly was a concern. And then when I look back at the document that you had provided, I believe it was from March of this year, and I'll confirm that, I believe, yeah, March of this year, you provided some data in regards to the capacity and utilization. And that was just pretty alarming to me in regards to in 2019, the average utilization was 80% for emergency shelters, 58% for interim housing, 66% for cold weather shelters, and then 77% for safe parking. And it just, we recognize the concerns that we have with trying to get people housed, but when you see that you have so many underutilized locations, I think it's just it's a little bit shocking that the solutions we're putting in place, that they're not near capacity, that they're not hitting 90% plus. And I appreciated the reasons included, listing off shelters don't allow pets, operating hours, or the utilization of it was unappealing, couples not wanting to be separated into gender specific areas, not enough storage, the referral process needed clarification, and then some people just not showing up for a bed that they had accepted. So I do think that just needs to be a focus, because if we go through some efforts to try and create more of these temporary or short-term shelter options, we need to identify what these hurdles are. And again, it seems like, a lot of them have been identified already. So we need to have that in mind, because we shouldn't be looking at 58, 66, or 77% occupancy. That was it. Thank you.
That's an excellent point, Raul. And I wonder, Consuelo, and I know you all are thinking about this too. Has there been an initial assessment of what needs to change as we think about new options?
We have started those conversations. The benefit is we have the data to inform future decisions. Some policies also are driven by the financing, both in how they're financed from a construction perspective, but also in the resource that we use to pay for the operations. So we are looking, actually it's been the basis of our conversations on a weekly basis. Some of the things that were highlighted because of COVID is this difference in policies that Hillary mentioned, where every shelter is a little different. And also in the way that we talk about the utilization and making sure that the data is showing the actual capacity usage. And I say that in the sense that sometimes we have some beds that are available and they may remain vacant because they can only be, or they can only certain people can sleep in that bed because of the way that the financing or because of a partnership that we might have. So we're absolutely looking at that, Chairperson Chavez.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing before we take our final vote that would be really helpful would be to take a look at the most like models that we have that we're recommending, so that we can take a look at the utilization. Because I think one point that was raised, that Hillary raised when we very first looked, our very first meeting, was that there are certain facilities that people just do not want to go to. Like, they will make a choice to stay on the street, and we should just be really open about what makes a place safe and appealing and not. I think that's a really, really excellent point. So let's think about how to build that into the last, when people are making their ranking their choices. I want to just do a real quick time check with everyone. It's almost 7:15. I really would like the staff, if folks if we can maybe go 10 minutes past our time, I'm going to ask the staff not to do the Evelyn Woods speed reading version of the funding, but I really would like them to get that funding piece out, so that you all can digest that, ask quick questions, and then we can start our next meeting discussing anything that was left off of the funding item, and then we'll take public comment one more time and under the public comment section. Is that all right if we proceed that way? I think the funding's pretty chunky. I mean, it's like really important, so I think we need to know that. And if your windows are off, I'm just going to assume consent. I'm going to assume a yes. All right, so if we could have staff, thanks, Nancy. If we could have staff present on this, would be great.
Thank you, Chairperson Chavez, and this is Catherine Kaminsky. I'm going to try to give you the high-level overview here and keep this brief, but also, we can follow up with responses to questions as well. So I was asked to start with talking about our state, federal, and local funding sources. And I know on the state side, there's a lot of questions about the HEAP and HAP funding. So HEAP is the Homeless Emergency Aid Program, and HAP is the Housing and Homelessness Assistance Program, I believe. I should have written out what they are, because these acronyms always trip me up. But so these are both one-time funding sources that came from the state in the last couple of years that were part of the state budget process. So these are not our typical funding sources. These were announced to us and then allocated very quickly. And the HEAP funds were first, and they were allocated to the County of Santa Clara, the Santa Clara County Continuum of Care, and the City of San Jose. And the intent of these funds were to meet immediate needs. The HAP funding came a year and a half later, the next year's budget process at the state. They allocated additional funds to distribute across the state. And the same jurisdictions received funding through the HAP process. There's a second HAP round of funding coming, but we haven't seen any information other than we know it's coming. So I'm going to talk about the HEAP funding and the first round of HAP. So important to note, these are one-time funding sources. They are not renewable. So when we were discussing allocation of these funds, then we had to keep in mind that, permanent housing services that would be needed for multiple years for clients is not an option with a one-time funding source because there's no future funding available. We, in the process of determining how we were going to utilize our HEAP funds and our HAP funds, we gathered priorities, input on our priorities through our public meetings. We also, utilized the extensive community plan process from the last community plan, as well as the process that we had initiated in developing this community plan to gather additional input and focus on the priorities that were identified by the community and our partners. So those priorities, and of course, appropriate for one-time funding, those priorities were temporary housing operations and capital needs, homelessness prevention, outreach, and basic needs services. And all of these funds were awarded through a competitive process as well. So next slide. So for our HEAP funding, this is not including the City of San Jose funding. This is the county and the COC funding because the Office of Supportive Housing is the administrative entity for the COC funding as well. So this gives you a breakdown of how these funds were allocated. The biggest category was on the temporary housing operations. So these were allocated through a competitive procurement process to community-based organizations and funded things like, runaway youth shelter, interim housing and case management for adults with disabilities, transitional housing program for survivors of domestic violence, a myriad of different temporary housing operations support. The second largest allocation here was homelessness prevention and housing problem solving. So the majority of this went into our homelessness prevention system. Then we also allocated some funding for capital and one-time needs and put out a capital improvement notice of funding availability, took applications from community-based organizations to meet capital needs. That's things like conversion of storage or office space into space that could be used for sheltering additional individuals and add beds to our existing shelters. And then the next category, support for basic needs services. This was really expanding our drop-in centers in North and South County. And then a small amount for rapid rehousing that was just filling a one-time gap, because again, these are one-time funds, as well as a small amount of outreach in our community. On the HAP budget, we planned to extend the programs that were funded with the one-time HEAP funding for an additional 2 years. So that first HEAP funding, most of the programs were funded for 2 years, and HAP, when that was allocated by the state, that allowed us to plan to extend those programs for another 2 years. We also allocated some additional capital funding in this one, as well as increased homelessness prevention and housing problem solving, as we know the need for those services is increasing, and we are not yet meeting the need. And again, allocated funds for basic needs services, outreach, and rapid rehousing for a new program that was identified with a short-term need for funding. On the other state programs that I just wanted to mention is the Emergency Solutions Grant. There are 2 ESG allocations that come to our community. One is through the City of San Jose. The second is awarded to the Santa Clara County COC through the state. So these are federal funds, get passed through the state, and then come into our community. These are awarded annually and so are renewable. We receive approximately $400,000 a year and utilize these funds for a rapid rehousing program, again, aligned with our COC priorities. And then the California Emergency Solutions and Housing, I believe this is the cash funding. This was one-time funding, although it was 2 separate awards, but it is not ongoing funding. The total was approximately $2.5 million. This was funding from the state that was revenue from a specific trust fund, and has a 5-year timeline. So in this case, the timeline was a little bit longer than that HEAP funds, which was 2 years. So we allocated some funding to rapid rehousing and then increased the amount of temporary housing operations available as well. Then lastly, just to talk about additional local resources. So when on the federal side, the Housing and Urban Development Department allocates Community Development Block Grant, affectionately known as CDBG, and home funds. These are awarded, some jurisdictions in our community are what's called entitlement jurisdictions and receive their own allocations of CDBG and home. And that entitlement process is primarily determined by the size of the jurisdiction. So our larger jurisdictions have CDBG and home funds that come directly to that city. The county also has the Urban County Program that covers some of the smaller cities and the unincorporated area of the county. And important to note on these funding sources, they do have some very strict regulations and restrictions on them. The CDBG, only 15% of that can be used for public service activities. So this is a grant that also allows for housing rehab, economic development activities, and that 15% cap would apply to any sort of homeless service activity, but would not apply to capital costs. So the capital costs, anything like rehab of shelters, things like that, would not count towards that 15% cap. The home funds are really focused on affordable housing and home ownership activities in the community, most often used for development of affordable housing, but also used for tenant-based rental assistance in some jurisdictions, as well as first-time home buyer type programs. And then in some jurisdictions, there are other funding sources. Of course, every jurisdiction has local general funds, when each jurisdiction has a process for determining how those funds are used. Some jurisdictions also have in lieu of fees. So if there is an inclusionary zoning in a specific jurisdiction, they may accept payment in lieu of developing affordable housing units, and have some flexibility in how they use those fees. We have special revenue bonds that are also specific to each of your jurisdictions, such as loan repayments or community benefit funds. So that's a very, very quick and fast overview of the different types of funding sources. There are other funding sources as well that I did not include all of them that are restricted to only sort of permanent sources. So the Continuum of Care program is the largest that the county receives from HUD, and that is only for permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing. So I didn't include all that information here because we cannot use it for temporary solutions.
Great, thank you. I know that was a lot to digest, but I know a few of you skipped ahead, and so I'm going to now go to questions and comments, and I'm going to ask Councilmember Ramirez. Thanks, Catherine.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, staff, for the presentations. And in particular, I want to thank Kimberly Thomas for her work on the City of Mountain View homeless-related initiatives, and for the presentation today. It's always nice to showcase the work that our cities are doing. So a few questions and then some brief comments. First, one of the things I had hoped to get from this presentation was a better understanding of the responsibilities of our jurisdictions in funding emergency shelter, interim housing, and homeless-related services. Kimberly was kind enough to provide a breakdown to me earlier today about that shows City of Mountain View investment and then county investment. And the thing that occurs to me immediately is there doesn't appear to be any rhyme or reason about who's spending money where. So can you share with us the county's expectations for local funding for homeless-related initiatives in housing?
You know what? I'll take that because I don't think I think it's kind of hard for the staff to say say the answer to this question. But to be frank, I think that for a very long time, when cities had redevelopment, there was an expectation that cities would be building affordable housing, and there's always been an expectation that cities provide services to everybody who lives in their jurisdiction, whether they're housed or unhoused. So for many years, I think you thought it was most cities thought it was a city responsibility. I'm sure the county did. What we saw our role was to provide services, the health and hospital system, mental health services, and the like. When cities lost redevelopment, one of the questions the county wrestled with is, do we get in the housing business? And the short answer is part of the reason we got into the housing business was that we recognized that whether we wanted to admit it or not, we were already in the housing business. And we were in the housing business because we pay for homes for foster youth. We pay for respite homes for people who are sick. And as you see in the list, you'll see that we have residential and recovery beds that are listed as part of this because, to the point that was earlier raised by Karina, Councilmember Dominguez, is that when people come out of being in custody and they're ready to get clean and sober, we started to provide services. We were already providing that service. The reason that we're having this conversation with all of you is that we don't have an unlimited pie. You don't have an unlimited pie, but we know we have this growing problem. So in terms of expectation, I think just as one member of the board, but certainly from a policy perspective, we're looking to support cities to support their constituents and all of your constituents, whether they're housed or unhoused, and better understanding how to stretch our limited dollars and partner with you on your limited dollars so that we can address a growing problem that we know is just going to get exponential unless we all jump on top of it.
That's helpful. Thank you. And maybe more on that later. So second question, one other area that I think would be helpful to focus on, probably not tonight, but in a future meeting, is the externalized cost of homelessness. So we know that there's a substantial cost that we will need to incur to provide interim housing, emergency shelter services for the unhoused. But we haven't really spent a lot of time talking about how much money we invest within our agencies and within the county on things like homeless encampment abatement and oversized vehicle enforcement, and certainly costs incurred through the healthcare system and the criminal justice system.
We actually have that study, and it's a study that we use to actually pivot us into the position we're in. And I think we sent it out kind of earlier, but I'm going to ask the staff to resend out the initial cost study that we did on homelessness that was part of leading us to our investment. But we can get that out to you. It's a little dated. It's got an update that came with it recently, but we'll get that out to the whole committee if we didn't already.
That's great. Thank you. I appreciate that. And also, so county costs, I would be interested also in understanding the cost to cities, since that could provide perhaps an incentive for us to address this more forcefully if we're finding that we're investing a lot of money in things that, sort of the aftermath when perhaps we should spend more in preventive measures. I guess just by way of a quick comment.
Lucas, the study does include that. So when you look at it, yeah, we'll send it out again, but it's a really good study. I mean, it's worth taking a look. It's a little dated, but it gives you the idea.
Okay, I'm sorry I missed that. Thank you. And then quick comment, I guess. I don't know if this is part of the expectation or scope of this task force, but I do think that a component of the outcome should be aligning the funding where we have the greatest opportunity. And there are cities that I think have made a good faith effort to invest and to change, our regulations to increase capacity, to provide services. And the political discussion that we're having is, is this really our responsibility? I'm sure every city hears this, but, there's a perception that we're, taking on county's responsibility or assuming responsibility for the county's homeless challenge and that kind of thing. And that it creates political constraints on using local funding to address this challenge. We've demonstrated, I think, very broad and consistent political support in Mountain View to do some very important things. I don't know if that's something that we will be able to sustain if we're not seeing, a greater infusion of regional and county funds in particular. And so I think where cities have stepped up to take, fairly dramatic action, maybe in some cases, it would be nice to align sort of the county focus in investment with those cities, and where cities perhaps are more hesitant or where there hasn't been that same level of investment, that I'm not sure it's really worth the cost of finding a way to invest money where it's not really necessarily welcome. So that would be one thing that we might want to look at. Aside from that, I appreciate the work that staff has done in presenting this information, and I look forward to learning more about the recommendations that we'll be considering later. Thank you.
Just parenthetically, when the county decided to play a bigger role in fighting homelessness, that was the number one concern of the board, is actually what Lucas just shared, which was, were we taking on the responsibility that actually belonged to the cities? And it's ironic, right? So I'm going to let you all bask in that irony for a minute. Mayor Larry Klein?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair. I'll try to keep this really short. First, I agree totally as far as the lack of redevelopment dollars and building affordable housing. And I appreciate what the county's done as far as partnering with the city. It took a lot of political will to get the cold weather shelter into our city, and then the Hamlin shelter, and then getting it to run year round. So I appreciate that partnership. As we, as most of the shelters now have reduced during COVID, conceivably, the number of people that can stay there, what we can do to utilize that same location for, parking lots or whatever to try to expand, I think is something that we need to look at. But from a funding standpoint, then, since this is what we're talking about, I know you're focusing on temporary housing. I would like to see how the home key dollars play into this, because, that's short-term, I'll say short-term investment for conceivably long-term housing. And I know we have several projects from a county-wide standpoint that have been done already, and another round of funding is going out. So I do think that plays into this. I know we've kind of focused on certain short-term housing, but I do think getting that feedback and how we can, what qualifies, what steps we need to get in order to get that funding in our cities would be good. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that, Mayor. Other Mayor, Vice Mayor Nancy Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. I have questions about the HEAP and HAP funding. So first question, really quick question is, what fiscal year are we currently in, and which one are we planning for?
Catherine?
We're currently in fiscal year 21, which is the last year of funding for HEAP. So we have to spend all of that funding by June 30th of this year. The HAP funding we have the first round of that funding. There's some overlap. We have, I believe, 5 years for that funding, but we're in the first year.
So HAP
does that
says
answer your question?
HAP says 3 years. So currently we are in fiscal year 21. There are 2 years left for HAP funding. How much is this per year or total? Of course,
total.
Total.
What I showed on the screen was total.
And how much of this has been encumbered or allocated in the HAP?
It has I have to look at the exact numbers, but almost all of it has been allocated in terms of we plan to continue the operational funding that we had allocated in HEAP, and the capital expenses were for specific projects that were already identified. So most of it has been allocated.
So none of these funding sources are particularly available to partner with cities.
All of the funding sources are funding services across the county and in various cities, but in terms of an open pot of funds to distribute, no, most of this is allocated to programs already.
So nothing net new. Yeah, okay. So nothing net new. Okay. Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Councilmember Esparza.
Thank you. I actually just had a quick question about the behavioral health item. When is that going to come before us?
I think I'm going to bring it to the next meeting. I'm going to have to sit with staff and with my co-chair and talk through how we get through all of the information and respond.
Yeah, it's a lot. Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Jerome?
So I had a question about the in lieu of fees, and whether there's any information about how many affordable housing units have been prevented from being built since, I don't know how long these fees have been being received, but over the years, like how many affordable housing units could have been built if these in lieu of fees weren't paid instead of, or if contractors or developers were required to have affordable housing units in their development projects. And also, real quick about a comment from last week regarding the census. I read the information regarding how the homeless are being counted in the census, and I don't think that was very adequate. I think it showed that there was only like one day that was set aside to count individuals that were in encampments, when a large portion of the homeless population are on the streets or in encampments. And since I know the census has been extended through the end of October, maybe those individuals need to reapproach the way that they counted the homeless and go out and count them again in a different way.
So on the first question on the in lieu fees, that's an interesting question. I don't know how we would know the answer to that because it's really city by city. May I ask staff if they have any thoughts about that?
Yes, Board Member Chavez, we can definitely partner. Every city does have on their website their inclusionary housing program, and they track the in lieu fees, and those in lieu fees are then pooled to fund affordable housing developments. So it's not actually as difficult as it sounds. We did collect some of that data when we were first starting Measure A in early 2017. Happy to pull that up, and we have our check-in meeting with our all the housing staff across the county on Wednesdays. So I'm happy to ask them as well, and they've been part of these conversations to see if they have some ideas about how to share that. It might not respond directly to the members' question, but we'll look at the data and see what we can share with this group. And then the second piece on the census, the response was rather simple. We have been working with the census team at the county. Our office had a representative on the census group who we provided a list of all of our service providers, all of our property management for facilities across the county, so that they can convey and communicate the census information out to both the unhoused and the housed population that are in our supportive housing programs. So perhaps I can check in with my team and see if we can provide a more fleshed out answer for that census question.
I think the second part, Consuelo, that he's raising is we actually don't know if the census will stay extended to October 31st. We're going to keep fighting to do that. We're going to count every day until someone makes us stop counting. But what I think we need to do is have a conversation with the census team to take a look at what their plan is this last 30 days as it relates to the homeless community. But we can do that, Jerome, and we'll follow up before the next meeting because we're going to just count till, like I said, the courts tell us not to. And if I could go to Anthony. Anthony, you're on mute, just in case you were trying to talk. Anthony?
Okay.
Yeah, there
yes. I had three questions, and they were for like Consuelo and KJ. The first one was about funding. They're all specifically about Pedro Street. And the first one was about the lease agreement with the owner. Because I know this place has been a elderly home, and because he didn't want to do the repairs, he shut the place down. Is there some kind of poison pill in the lease with them so that after the repairs are done, that I believe the county's doing for him, he doesn't come back and say, well, the tennis club across the street and the church behind us are now saying that, maybe I don't go back to serving elderly people. And like, when does a project like that become like, all are turned back? Like, when does like the cost of repairs start to begin to outweigh the actual lease agreement? And for like KJ, on these alternate plans for safe parking, shelters, and even the city-run overnight shelters, one of the biggest concerns of my peers is the security. They always feel, even like at Picardo, they always feel like the security that's used by these providers are always geared to be unfavorable toward the homeless. And sometimes grabbing their stuff and dumping their belongings. And it's always a different style with a different person, no matter how many times you return to that place. So is there a way to like utilize the sheriff's department, like the same way like the nighttime patrols go to like child support services, all the different buildings of the county to check in, or like the daytime too, where they go to the different social services offices? Is there a way to utilize them just to like tag along to the different places instead of having like the cumbersome security there, like the county or whoever negotiates the RFP take over the security part of the contract instead of the provider, and then they provide the security, which is a more experienced and has a more kind of, they've learned a lot more than some of these security agencies have when it comes to dealing with people experiencing homelessness.
If I may, through the chair, this is Consuelo.
Yes, please.
Thank you, Anthony, for that question. We're happy to share with you the details of the lease agreement. It is a public record on the interim housing program on Pedro Street. There are obligations that the owner is required to provide in order for the county to take possession of the property and take the lease start date based on those performance measures. So it's a little too complicated to get into tonight. Happy to talk to you offline, or also happy to provide the task force with those details. And then your second question related to security, always happy to hear feedback from the end users in terms of how we can better serve the community. So happy to talk with you separately about some of the opportunities for us to think about how we provide security and how those agreements and contracts are negotiated both directly with the vendors or with the service provider.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anthony. We're going to go to Mayor Sharp.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, my question was about in lieu fees as well. So in our city, we allow them only on small projects. On larger projects, we require inclusionary housing. And I'm sure this was a good idea at the time because we would prefer inclusionary. But now we're facing the situation where the 15% BMR requirement is 15% of zero because the property owners aren't building their approved projects. Not only that, we're about to lose some of our BMR units that are timing out. So I just wonder what the county's thought is. Maybe this policy of not allowing in lieu fees and requiring inclusionary is just not a great idea anymore, considering the housing market. So does the county have any thoughts on that? I know the developers prefer in lieu fees to inclusionary, but we like the opposite. So maybe there's some thoughts on that.
Consuelo, I don't know if you have given thought to that. I will give you just one piece of feedback, which is that I think there are many reasons that projects don't get built, and I think it becomes convenient to pick on one reason over another, and BMR housing being one of them. But I would have to say that it's been a while since I've had experience with the actual, getting projects out of the ground as a council member, as you're experiencing. And it might be of value at some point to ask other cities who have inclusionary zoning, whether or not they're seeing something similar, Mayor Scharf, because I'm not
No,
certain.
I mean, I wasn't saying that the requirement for BMR is why the projects are not getting built. They're not getting built for other reasons relating to the housing market for market rate housing. But it's one factor that they mention. And when we've said, oh, what if we let you do in lieu? They go, well, we're still not going to build anyway. So yeah, it's not just the BMR, but it is one factor.
Got it. Yeah. Let's give some thought to that, because it would be interesting, and Andy, I think it would be interesting even for your housing subcommittee of the cities association. It'd be interesting to know whether or not they're having similar experiences, if it's not one city versus another, or whether or not they're displeased with one policy over another. But thank you, Mayor Scharf. It's an interesting question. I'm going to now go to Mayor Pro Tem Yvonne. Your title throws me every time.
I'm sorry.
Mayor, say Vice Mayor. Go ahead, Mayor. Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Supervisor Chavez. President Chavez. When we talk about funding and cities working with the county, I'd just like to kind of better understand the joint commitment and partnership. So I think it's important to be able to serve our local residents and neighbors that are unhoused. And while I certainly not only appreciate but completely support the issue of equity in everything, including housing and housing people, I do think that it's helpful to getting community support, but more importantly, supporting unhoused where they already have that support with family, friends, familiarity, and questions of transportation. So we know from studies that people are more likely to thrive when they have services and can continue to stay in their community. If we're in partnership for the county, here's my question, similar, maybe it's KEEP or otherwise in county funds to build some of this, or using other government funding, are we able to reach out and house our local unhoused in need? Are we able to prioritize them or those identified? Or is there some other, how does that work?
Consuelo, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, it's a great question. Often we hear that when we're building supportive housing units, and this desire from the local jurisdiction to prioritize, quote unquote, your respective unhoused population. And we wanted to spend a little time. It's just the way these meetings are running. There isn't enough time to talk about everything, but we do have a client engagement team that as we start our lease-up process, and we did this in Morgan Hill, specifically around Orchard Ranch, and most recently at the crossings in the crossings on Monterey, where we have our client engagement team work with your staff, local police department, and your own kind of homeless team to talk about areas where your unhoused population resides or where that they live. And our client engagement team actually goes out there to assess them so that they can be included in our community queue, which is the pool where we draw from when we start the LISA process and enroll them into housing programs. So we've identified this as a gap in the way that we communicate about our system. So we are working on something that focuses more on this explanation to help communities understand the way you partner with us is through this client engagement that Rebecca was talking about earlier, some of the work that we've done with Mountain View as well, where we had one development that had 16 supportive housing units, and 14 of the 16, they're from Mountain View, or they have a connection to Mountain View. So we will be working on something. I don't know that it'll be ready for your next meeting, but we will be talking about it with your staff and figuring out how we present that to your respective councils.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. I think it's really helpful for us to be able to have some of that flexibility. I know our staff is working really closely with you. So thank you. Thank you for all of that.
Thank you, Vaughn. And we're going to go to Brian, and then the last word on this will be council member Esparza, and then we still have public comments. So I want to make sure we can get to that before we have to wrap up. So Brian, and then Maya.
Yeah. So I'm trying to digest a lot of data that's come our way over the last few weeks here, which has been great info. Thank you. I think about the types of housing that's available. I think about the finances available, the various resources that we have in our region here. And if I think that we're supposed to make some recommendations here, the end game is to have some recommendations on what to do. Some of the data I have not heard is some of the inputs here is who we're supposed to help. What is the population of the homeless? And some specific information would be, if we have it, is how much of the population actually needs some kind of medical support? Is it 50% of the population, whether it's mental or physical? Is it abuse issues? If there's some metrics we have about that population, and if we can marry that with, I don't know, some of the resources of the cities, because maybe some cities, whether it's by geography or the resources they have available, some cities may be more adaptable at some interim housing, where some locations may be better served for permanent housing. So is there a way to marry that information so that, and ideally come up with, if the idea, if you do these three things, you know you need mental and physical support for these people, and whatever those three things are, we may start to think about how to allocate those resources for the types of buildings to best serve the population we're trying to fill. Does that make sense? It seems like who's our population and what are their needs? I haven't heard that yet.
Yeah, and you know what, Brian, you asked that at the last meeting or the meeting before, and I don't think we responded to that. And I'm going to ask staff if we can do an infographic for the next meeting that addresses that nests it into the strategy 3, the way that you're all thinking about it. Because I think that's a really important point. I don't think we're going to have an exact match in terms of, and therefore funding, and therefore, what does that mean? Just drilling down city by city. It may in some instances, but I think the broad question you're asking is one we should answer more clearly. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.
Maya.
Thanks. I will be brief. As we were talking today, I think I mentioned last time that the county's largest permanent supportive housing project is in my district. It's called Renaissance Place. It just opened up in January, sorry. And so I actually wanted to extend an invitation. This is me being very generous. It's not my building, but along with the county and other folks, if you're interested in coming to see it and have a tour, I think it might be really helpful. The county did a tremendous job along with the developer in the design. There are services on site, and I think that there are, as we talk about land for temporary versus permanent, I think taking a look at some of what is out there in other cities. I'm interested in seeing what is also in other cities in the county. But I just wanted to extend that invitation. I have a number of both temporary and permanent housing sites in my district. And what I would say is that we've learned a lot about how to design them in a way to offer services to folks, whether it's temporary or permanent. And the other thing I wanted to add is for Renaissance Place, and I know this is permanent and not temporary housing, we did the same. The county and the providers, I think it was Abode, they actually did extensive outreach in the creek near this site to see if folks could qualify and score enough to get in there. And I have families, there are singles, there are people from other cities in our county who live there. And I would caution us of just saying we only want people from this city. We really are a community. Whether someone lived in Gilroy a year ago and now they're in Renaissance Place, I consider them a District 7 resident and a county resident. And so I just wanted to encourage us to really kind of think about how we look at our populations and how we serve them. Thank you.
One point I'll make about what Councilmember Esparza just said is that when it's funny, I literally cannot say the name of that housing development, and I can't tell you
because it's a weird name.
I can't tell you how many community meetings I went to and referred to it as the housing development because I couldn't get the name right. But the one thing I wanted to say was that the really important partnership there was that the surrounding communities were very focused on making sure that the homeless residents in their community had an opportunity to participate in that development. And it really was by the urging of the neighbors that we really focused on trying to get people in that community housed. And so I wanted to just say we had some compassionate neighbors that were very interested in assisting with that, and that's partly how that happened. With that, I know we had a lot of discussion. We have a lot of follow-up. Our next meeting, and it was going to be our last meeting, but I recognize that we'd be jamming a lot in. I want to tell everybody the next meeting will be a bit longer, so bring a snack because we're going to continue to dive through. What we're going to send out in advance is a more filled out document that really does put these types of options right next to each other again, and with some of the feedback that we got, including I want to add, what the rate is of utilization as part of that. And then the other thing is, I do really think that Brian hit the nail on the head that we have to be able to put forward who are the people, who are the human beings we're trying to help. And then I'm going to ask the staff if you could include the slide that shows the last homeless counts by city, so we have that in front of us as well. I think that's a very important document for us to look at. I know that there were a number of questions that we have a lot of follow-up that we need to do between now and the next meeting that we'll make sure we do that. And Scott, I wanted to ask if you could reach out to David Campos and make sure that the census folks, that you have a discussion with them about outreach relative to the homeless community. And that discussion will need to happen relatively quickly because we really don't know what the courts will do in terms of allowing us to count, and then be able to follow up with Mr. Shaw on that. That would be great. All right. So with that, I'm going to go to the public comment and then we will adjourn. So I'm going to ask the clerk if you could please call on our public speakers.
Our next speaker is Scott Largent. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Scott Largent. I was hoping, and maybe this is the next meeting, that behavioral health would be participating along with the public defender's office, maybe even possibly the alternate and the IDO. The reason I bring this up is 5 years ago when I threw in the towel and decided to get clean, do the right thing to be a father, that's where I ended up. I had a drug charge, and I had lost my motorhome with everything that was in it. You guys have heard about this a lot, but with that first line of defense not functioning properly, it just sent me in a spiral. And I got put into a position that I had to fight for my property. I had to fight to figure out where my father's ashes were at. I had to fight to figure out where my dog was at. The reason I bring this up is there are thousands of people on our street that have been through these same situations that are from each one of your cities. And eventually they all get dumped into the city of San Jose. But they all go through, well, at least most of them do, go through the criminal justice system. Molly O'Neill, Damon Silver, the people that run the public defender's office, are asleep at the helm. They're allowing the homeless community to get thrown through the civil channel right now, traffic violations, citations. These are all things that they don't get an attorney for. And then it cripples them. I'm your problem now because I had a horrible representation. Okay, I'm not on probation. I'm not on parole. Don't have a criminal record, 5 years sober, yet I live in your parking lot across from the county building. There's something wrong with that. And many of you might get offended by what I have to say, but I want to protect the people that are on the streets from the criminal element. We are not putting people into the Santa Clara County Jail right now. When we let them loose, they're getting into these segments of our community that need protection. They need services. They are our constituents, and they are taxpayers.
Our next speaker is Robert Aguirre. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Robert Aguirre here. Yeah, we're going to talk about the financing and how we're looking at all these different alternatives and trying to figure out which is the best alternative to where we're going to put the money that we do have and what money we're going to try to generate. I'd like to point out that sanctioned encampments is going to house the most number of people in the quickest amount of time and for the least amount of money. And I think it's something that we should put a lot of effort into because it's going to take a long time to develop some of these other types of housing. And that kind of housing could be going on anyway, because we're going to continue to be receiving money, even though Measure A funds are limited, but we will continue to be receiving money from all the in lieu fees that are going to be coming in from all the developers that are building all over the place and including throughout the county. And that's money that can go to try to provide more of the permanent type housing, but the interim housing should not just be only brick and mortar. And we can certainly do safe park programs for a lot less money than what is being projected. We need to talk to some of the other safe park program providers that are out there and let them come to the table and let you know how they're operating and why their costs are so much lower. And we also need to invite some of the people that have experience with running self-governed homeless encampments so that people have a say as to how their community is being run, just like any one of us that lives in a place where we have an HOA or a neighborhood association where we elect people that will come up with the rules and that everybody agrees with. And if you don't agree with it, you can run for office. And if you get that office, you can bring about whatever changes you want. But it's in the hands of the people and not in the hands of the government telling them how to do this, live their lives. And it's very important that we set up a council for them.
Our next speaker is B. Beekman. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak, and the timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hi. Thank you for the meeting tonight, and thank you for the words of both the public speakers, Scott Largent and Robert Aguirre. To clarify myself, if I didn't mention it earlier in the previous public comment, thank you for offering 2 public comments today. I'm from San Jose, and the mixed use issues were important to San Jose and important to the VTA, and the mixed income housing issues. They were becoming a understandable concept, and it was making some interesting progress. And I hope you can really be considering that in these lectures, in this workshop series you'll be having. And it's in San Jose, we just gone through a bunch of police matters, the past few weeks, and I'm learning, you know, above all else, I mean, there's so many good ideas that are possible at this time. I hope everyone can just be open to really good ideas. And Robert Aguirre just offered a lot of really good ideas. And Scott Largent has ideas of law enforcement. And you talked about your next meeting as they'll have a certain focus. And to allow yourselves to be open just to hear all that is possible and things that, say, Robert Aguirre just described, you know, I hope you can have those capabilities to do that. And San Jose, you know, it's my personal feeling. San Jose has, you know, its own, you know, issues to really want to build more human rights to housing issues. And that's been an important concept San Jose is really trying to learn, and it can be of help to other Santa Clara County cities, I hope, for everyone. And we all practice our good ideas, and hopefully this will be a good process. Good luck in your work. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Liana Crabtree. I am unmuting you. Please accept the unmute. You'll have 2 minutes to speak. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Thank you. This is Liana Crabtree. I appreciate the presentations today, and to understand that there are creative and widespread resources available to help those with inadequate housing and funding, but that the need is much greater than what is available. And so I urge you to consider prioritizing housing as a human right. Housing as a human right, as explained in the National Protocol for Homeless Encampments in Canada by Leilani Farha and Caitlin Schwan from April of this year, which would include but not be limited to the following principles. Principle 1, recognize residents of homeless encampments as rights holders. Principle 2, support meaningful engagement and effective participation of homeless encampment residents. Principle 3, prohibit forced evictions of homeless encampments. Principle 4, explore all viable alternatives to eviction. Principle 5, ensure that relocation is human rights compliant. Principle 6, ensure encampments meet basic needs of residents consistent with human rights. Principle 7, ensure that human rights-based goals and outcomes and the preservation of dignity for homeless encampment residents is prioritized. And Principle 8, respect, protect, and fulfill the distinct rights of Indigenous peoples in all engagements with homeless encampments. I have sent my comments and resources as written comment this evening. I also agree that we need better census attention to the unhoused populations. Thank you.
That concludes our speakers, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to all of our public speakers and to our team who hung in there for a long meeting. Our next meeting is going to be slightly longer. So like you said, bring a snack. I will see you all on October 15th at 5:30. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, President Chavez.